Welcome back to Tech Society, the podcast delivering candid conversations with smart people, tech and business leaders, academics, and more about their big ideas and how they're changing our world. And now your hosts, Alex Dunmow and John Nguyen.
Hey techies, we've got a really exciting episode for you today. Today we have Michael Sheldrick, who is the co-founder and chief policy and government relations officer at Global Citizen, where he oversees international advocacy campaigns in support of a range of noble causes, such as climate change and universal sanitation.
Since 2009, Global Citizens have taken over 24.8 million actions. Those actions, combined with high-level advocacy work, have resulted in over 100 commitments made by governments, multilateral institutions, and corporations. These commitments are worth $48.4 billion. Of this total, $22 billion has already been dispersed, with another $26.4 billion set to be released in the upcoming years. That's a total of 45.4% of funds raised that has been released to affect 880 million lives.
In this episode, Michael shares with us his amazing journey, imparts his experience on growing digital communities, and even gives us valuable advice on how we can be successful at bringing our own philanthropic endeavor, RideFair, the co-op rideshare platform, to the world. All right, so
Great.
Thank you for agreeing to talk to us so late.
That's fine. The Empire State Building is gleaming in the background there. Not sure if you can see it,
Okay.
but
Nice.
it's not too bad. It's just gone 8 p.m., so all good.
All right, well let's just jump into it. Well, I think we'll start with your days in Perth first. So, how long have you been in the United States?
So I've lived in the US since the start of 2013. I originally came here in 2012, and it was a quick trip back and forth while I was still at university, and then ended up going back to Perth. This was after our first Global Citizen Festival. Came back in 2013 because we realized we would do it again because Stevie Wonder gave us a call and asked if he would perform. So we were like, well, we're not going to say no to that. And I came expecting to be here for just 6 months. Ended up thinking, okay, I might extend this for 2 years. And then here I am in coronavirus times in August 2020, still living in New York.
So, are you currently under lockdown or?
Yeah, what's the status over there?
I actually am. I'm in quarantine. New York is actually now pretty good. It was really bad back in April, March. It was, the global epicenter, and I actually caught COVID at the peak of the mountain,
Wow.
they were saying, where there were tens of thousands of cases. Yeah, it was pretty scary, scary time. It kind of felt like end of day times. But now New York's actually one of the best in the country, so much so that they've quarantining people who come from over 30 other states. And, we went on, me and my girlfriend decided to go on holiday last weekend, and it was worth it. It was a great week. It was her birthday. But now we're, paying the price with 2 weeks of self-imposed quarantine in a small apartment here in Manhattan. But yeah, it's the price we're willing to pay to keep the city safe.
Oh, yeah. So that's definitely pretty scary catching it at its peak. So I'm glad you came out the other end fine.
Yeah, it wasn't much fun. It was a crazy time for us. There was a sense of we lived not that far from a hospital, and there was ambulances going by. There were, lights and sirens. It was really scary. And then on the news, you were hearing all these reports of hospitals being crowded. Fortunately, I didn't need to go into a hospital, but you sort of had this anxiety that if you needed to go, you might not be able to be seen or treated. Yeah, it was. Yeah, that probably made it worse, to be honest.
So to get past the COVID topic, which I'm pretty sure everyone is kind of tired of anyway, tell us about your days in Perth and how you got started with Global Citizen.
Yeah, so I got started back in Perth 2010, 2011. So I had been volunteering. Global Citizen was then called Global Poverty Project. And essentially, we saw it as our mission to really educate people around Australia about issues related to poverty, really on the understanding that if you looked at all of the great issues of our time, climate change, poverty, these were all issues about systems, right? And, when you change systems, no amount of gala night, charity dinners, quiz nights, movie nights is going to raise enough money to do that. You have to shift policies, you have to get businesses. So, it was this idea of a movement. And, we had thought if we develop a presentation, much like what Al Gore did on climate change with Inconvenient Truth, took that around Australia, we would be able to motivate people to act. What we found, though, is, I was doing this while at university in Perth. I was training people up to deliver this, to go out to churches, workplaces, schools. What we found, though, is after about 18 months, hundreds of thousands of people having seen this platform, is really we didn't have a lot to show for it. Hundreds of thousands is great, but it's not millions. And if you want to take something to scale, that's where you need to go. But secondly, we kind of these 150,000, what were they doing? And watched the presentation, but the ongoing impact. We had naively thought that maybe they would go to some of the big NGOs out there, but they didn't really know, other than encouraging people to sponsor a child, what to do. And so that's where we came up with this concept that we would have to build the platform ourselves. And that's where Global Citizen came about. And where I got roped into it in Perth is back in 2011, the Queen was coming to Perth. It was last time the Queen came to Perth for this big meeting. Yeah, all these leaders from across the Commonwealth. Julia Gillard was the Prime Minister. And we thought, this moment, maybe it's a moment to galvanize the public around. And we thought poverty was too broad an issue to galvanize, too abstract. So someone suggested to us, what about the issue of polio? It was actually a friend of mine who had been involved in Rotary in Perth, David Goldstone. And Rotary had long been involved. Turns out it was an Australian Rotarian who had founded this global program to eradicate polio. And basically we thought, well, why don't we try and do something crazy and make this summit with the Queen and everything about polio? And this was a disease many Australians hadn't heard of because it had long since been eradicated. Around the world, it was 99% eradicated, but it remained in a few countries, but it had this funding gap of $500 million. And we thought maybe we can galvanize the public by actually addressing some of the myths that ending poverty isn't possible, by showing them this shining example of polio becoming the second human disease in history to be eradicated. And this meeting in Perth was the perfect opportunity to do it. So, I was a hustler. I wrote letters, did whatever I could. It's a long story, but a long story cut short, basically ended up in South Fremantle High School, backstage as the Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, was giving this big announcement on education. And she was kind enough to offer me 15 minutes of her time to basically discuss the pitch. And I said, would you, the same pitch I'd given you, I said, these summits are usually talk fests. Why not do something that will have a legacy? And she said, she said two things. The first thing is she told me to hurry up and get on with the story because she was on her third shot of Red Bull for the evening. The second thing she said is, I'm interested in this, but I need some help. And I thought, what are you talking about? And essentially what she was saying is, she needed permission because in the end of the day, we have to give her permission as taxpayers to spend what is in the end our money if she was going to make this big commitment. And, I just blurted out, I said, what about if we organized a big concert somewhere in Perth as these leaders came in to provide you a moment? And she said, if you can do that, we've got a deal. Again, cut another long story short, we managed to convince John Legend to fly all the way to Perth.
Wow.
Spent more time flying there. Yeah, it was a crazy story.
Awesome.
Involved people like Hugh Jackman making calls from New York. Yeah. MTV jumped in. But essentially, we had this dilemma. Maybe this is where tech comes in, and it's really something we now talk about it in terms of having a strategy, but out of his story is what our model would come from. And the dilemma was, how we would ensure we would have thousands of people come to this concert, because if the goal was to demonstrate public support, well, if we charged for tickets and no one came, that would be defeating. But we also had the issue of no way of tracking who was coming. And so came up with this idea of gamifying activism. Essentially what we did is we created a crude website. We got someone to donate us, I think $10,000 worth of their time. And essentially what happened is you went to the website, we had a petition to Julia Gillard and the other world leaders, and you signed this petition. And in signing that petition, you went in the draw to earn a ticket. So it was 25,000 people that signed a petition, 5,000 people got tickets. And the day after that concert, Julia Gillard announced, along with others, $118 million to polio eradication. And I still remember it, walking out, in a state of shock, looking at her and thinking, 6 months ago, we were in that classroom in Fremantle and you kept your word, I kept my word, and here we are changing the world. She put her hand on my shoulder as if to say, oh, yeah, you're so cute. But the reality is honestly, I didn't think, I thought that was it. I thought, I've done this moment, I've contributed towards humanity in a small way, now it's time to get on with life. And then we got this call from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and they offered us a multi-year grant to take this global. They, liked what we had done in terms of engaging the public. Bill Gates has billions of dollars, but their own experiences, you can't fake a movement. You can't buy a movement. It's got to be authentic. And they thought that we had tapped into something with technology, with popular culture, and asked us, if we would take it around the world. And 9 months later, we were standing in Central Park for the first ever Global Citizen Festival. This time, 60,000 people. And we had developed an app on the phone that people could download. And essentially in downloading the app, you could volunteer your time, you could take action, and in doing so, you would accrue points, and you could trade in those points to go in the draw to earn a ticket to the festival. And so we're now eight festivals later. We were meant to have one in September this year, but we've obviously, like many, pivoted in many ways with millions of global citizens around the world. And we've expanded not just to our own events, but, all sorts of rewards. We're looking at launching an exciting campaign here in America in coming weeks, aimed to get out the vote. And we're going to look at how we can use rewards as a way to encourage people to check their status here in America. And so, using this idea of gamification technology to really give people the ability to shape policy and have their voice heard. And that was sort of a long story.
No, that was
kind
great.
of how I went from Perth to New York.
No, that was perfect. That's brilliant. That's quite an achievement, because growing an active community like that is pretty difficult, especially one that goes beyond just pressing like on something and joining a Facebook group. Activities out of people, getting people's time and commitment. It must feel pretty rewarding.
But just on that, I mean, community and engagement is really what in this day and age is what we're trying to do with Global Citizen. And, it is, as the name implies, a community of global citizens that recognize, we're all in this together, and we're only going to address these issues by working together. Coronavirus, climate change, things that affect us all. But it's very hard to do. And we've learned, we've tried, we've tested. But, I look on Facebook, there's a conservative commentator here in America called Ben Shapiro, and he has over 50, Ben Shapiro, but I read somewhere the other day, the guy gets 50 million engagements through his Facebook page, and there's questions around that. But that is more than New York Times, CBS, like all of these, Washington Post, all of these traditional media outlets combined, and he's built a community there, 50 million engagements that has strong political impact. And so for us, It's how do you engage? How do you, provide content that's going to be appealing? How do you provide actions? And to your point about slacktivism, okay, well, it's one thing to sign a petition, but have you volunteered? Have you checked your status to vote? Have you rang your local member of parliament or your local member of Congress? I mean, it's a journey. And for us, it's not just the quantity of people, it's obviously the quality, but it's hard work. And then you have obviously a moment which we didn't anticipate, we work, we work year round to engage as many people as possible. Suddenly COVID-19 comes along, and out of nowhere, in the space of a month, we're able to pull together this virtual concert, that One World Together at Home, that brings everyone together all on the same day. And suddenly we see engagements like go through the charts. In France, we had been trying to sign people up for a few months previously. And I think on a single day, we had, I think, where we had been signing up 100 people, maybe over a couple of days, suddenly through no active effort on our part, we had over 40,000 people sign. Wow. like that. The question is how can you keep them involved and convert that to tangible action?
It's interesting you bring up Ben Shapiro. He's tapped into, I would say, young male rage and existential angst even. And I think that's a much easier community to tap into, exploiting people's fear and anger. Whereas Global Citizen seems to try and tap into people's hope and optimism and build a positive community. But that must be a lot harder too, especially right now when everything feels kind of hopeless. How do you combat that with your messaging and your marketing?
When we did One World Together at Home and just the response from it actually did show this deep yearning and almost this sense of shared experience, this recognition that everyone was going through this same experience at the same time, and this understanding that actually we are all the same. And we need to end this for everyone, because no one's safe until everyone's safe. And you saw that outpouring. And it's funny, we were prepared for an avalanche of trolls against it. And it didn't eventuate. I think in my experience, it's about keeping it on real people's needs, not to make it too academic, not to make it philosophical, not to make it ideological. But there we took it that we're all in this together. The people who we need to get behind right now and buy time for are frontline health workers. And as Lady Gaga said, it was designed as a love letter. And I think, that hatred, that nationalism that you referred to, it's easy to exploit in the short term for very quick gain. But over time, you can show that actually has it delivered? Has it actually met people's needs? And I think for us as activists, it's always the challenge is how do you cut through and talk about people's needs? And so for us, you can even see it in the quest for a vaccine. At the moment, there's this race on for the wealthy nations to almost snatch up the vaccines as soon as it becomes available and leave nothing on the table for poorer nations. And I think for us, it's to bring it back to that spirit of fairness, of equity. Is it fair for someone like me, 32-year-old healthy male in New York, to be getting a vaccine before, a health worker in South Africa or in India? The answer is probably not. But these are the issues. If we can bring it back to principles of fairness, of equity, shared experience, and people's needs, we tend to have greater resonance. But it is hard. It's definitely a challenge. And so if anyone's got any bright ideas, we'd love to hear it.
I'm curious about, you mentioned that we talked about slacktivism a bit. Did you run into any issues with, haters, opposition and criticisms and about the whole rallying the troops in a online activist sense? Do you have people just saying that there's no point? And how do you deal with that?
No, it's a good question. And look, I can tell you that as someone that has been involved in digital campaigning for a decade now, even I get cynical when I get emails asking me to sign a petition to save the whales or, protect the gorillas.
I've seen a few change.org, I believe. And
And I think it's actually because of what I've seen that it works, but it works if it's done well. It's made me far more tuned to actually there's a lot of poorly run digital campaigns out there, which is a shame because I think it has this impact of driving cynicism about the ability for digital campaigning to make a difference across the board. I think at Global Citizen, part of my role is I'm our chief policy officer, and with rigor and the utmost scrutiny, all of the actions we come across at Global Citizen, my question is always around impact. What impact will this deliver? So I'm never going to, really think that a petition that just says to dear world leaders, put it out there is going to make an impact. But if I understand, okay, how could that petition highly targeted? What's the strategy behind that petition? Then it could make an impact. I think, if you know that, I don't know, there's an opportunity, maybe one of your supporters has a rare encounter with a politician tomorrow, then chances are giving them thousands of signatures with a concrete ask is going to make a difference. But, we ask ourselves a number of questions. Is it winnable? Is there a clear target here? Is there actually a clear outcome that we're asking? If I do this, what will it lead in? And we often ask ourselves the but-for test. If Global Citizens don't respond here, is this going to happen anyway, or is this something that could really only happen with an outpouring of Global Citizen support? So that's the first end, is actually before we even launch a campaign, making sure we answer those questions. On the second end, it's then about following these commitments through right to the end. And I would say often these campaigns launch, they might have a quick win. You see tomorrow, if you sign these petitions and then a week later, it's, you hear this impact, and then you might never hear about it again. And for us, we follow and track every commitment ever announced in response to our campaign. So we use Salesforce, and we have over 100 commitments collectively worth over $48 billion logged into Salesforce going back the last decade. We update it. We follow up with those leaders that have made commitments. Cool. And if they don't respond, or if the response isn't an adequate one, we can say, well, we've got these millions of global citizens we will go back to. So it's the ongoing accountability that we believe in. And then, of course, what many groups get wrong, and which I don't think we're perfect at, I think we could get much better, although it's something we've invested more in, is then how do you communicate that? How do you communicate to global citizens the difference their actions have made on an ongoing basis, even in an incremental way? As an example, we're campaigning right now to ensure the US government steps up and supports testing in parts of Africa, because without testing, these countries aren't going to be able to return to normalcy. We had the senator of New York, a guy called Chuck Schumer, get calls from global citizens in New York State, which he represents. That senator then went to the White House and responded and passed our ask along, right? It's not the outcome. The White House hasn't agreed to it, but even knowing, wow, that senator, he's got so many issues, but because I rang his office, this put this top of his desk and made him relay that to the White House. That's important to let global citizens know, every person that made that phone call, because that might encourage them to do it again. But then it's also, communicating the impact of it as well. And maybe if we did that more and groups got better at that communication, we wouldn't have this cynicism around digital campaigning. But I see it. I know what works, and I know when things can work well, and also when they don't. And we've obviously had the benefit of trial and error. But I can tell you that $48 billion, which includes those commitments to polio eradication, has impacted, more than 880 million lives. And, that's ultimately the cumulative impact every citizen that's taken action on one of our platforms.
How do you deal with such a decentralized community? Because Global Citizens is, it's an online citizenry. And do you talk to everyone through, typical social media, Twitter, Facebook? You have mentioned your own app as well, but do they actually all sit completely disconnected from one another, or is there like a centralized area for everyone to communicate?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. At the moment, the answer is no. There's no centralized area, and this kind of goes back to that point about community, right? And how do you build that? And over the years, as you look at our app, we've tried. I mean, the app is, in a sense, the app is really the place where you go for the news. That's where you go to take action. But at the moment, I would say we still got some work to go to actually, build that, embed more fully the essence of community. A couple of things we've done is just actually allowing you to see who else is taking action. So you realize, that actually you're not just one person taking this. If you're making a call to a senator, you're one of dozens, which actually says, look, wow, okay, if I'm just making this call, but if several others like me are also making this, maybe this is going to have an impact. We have a Facebook group for the most dieharded, and we communicate across Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and increasingly sought to invest more in that community. And it's again, it comes back to what I said before: building a movement of people. It's hard. It takes work. But what we have seen is engagement increase, even to things like push notifications. I remember we were so nervous last year about doing a push notification. And basically it was asking people to tweet. I actually think it was Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada. And some of our team was so fearful about doing a push notification from the app because they thought we'd have so many uninstalls, right? And actually we pushed it. The uninstalls were minimal. We got so many tweets to the Canadian government that within 24 hours, the relevant minister responsible actually replied and made a commitment. It was around HIV/AIDS at the time. and it was a lesson. And I said to our team, look, let's use data, let's use facts. In the end, I said, look, we haven't done this. If we do a push notification and we find out that there is uninstall, we won't do it again. But let's try this out, because we could be leaving a big chunk of actions on the table. Interestingly, another thing we've started to do a lot more of is actually text messages as well, and that's been a lot of fun. We did it during we along with a few other partners, we created World Mask Week a few weeks ago, and we were texting people, getting them to send in the photos. If you're wearing an interest in design, and then we say, we'll put the most interesting photos on our social media page. We're starting to do that now around voting. Simple questions. Do you want to be on this messaging list to find out more about voting? Yes. Okay. Well, here's what's going on in your state. Here's how you can find out more. So increasingly, we've invested in multiple mediums of communication, and really trying to pivot in terms of what's the most effective way to engage our audience and get them to turn into actions. But what I feel most proud of is, if you go back 5 years ago, it really was, people engaging, simply, to earn that ticket to the festival. And what we realized is that's not enough for a 365-day movement. I mean, what would we do now in coronavirus times when you can't do a festival? And I think the ongoing combination of regular content, communication, interest and rewards, but across a diversity of areas, has allowed us to broaden, but also increase engagement. And that's been reflected in the actions, and then means that we can operate even when we can't produce large scale events.
Before we continue this podcast, here's a message from our sponsor.
We believe that you can create art and beauty with technology. We think big. We move quietly. We are Ninja Software.
I'm curious about, you mentioned a few times of gamification. when you for voter status, for instance, if someone can submit their voter status and they get rewarded for that, how do you confirm that? Do you just trust, or do you actually verify? Do they send photos? What's the process like for the gamification process?
Yeah, so it's all verified, and to give you an example, if you make a phone call, for instance, it's not that we send out an email on the app. It's got a number that you might punch in and ring separately. What happens is if you take the call on action on the app, we've designed it so you say, yes, I want to call this senator. You press that, and then the app will actually ring that person's phone. And then at the start of the phone call, it will actually be a global citizen voice, and they will kind of say, okay, in 30 seconds, someone from the senator's office is going to pick up the phone, or you might get a voice message. These are the types of things you might want to say,
Wow,
kind of gives
cool.
you a bit of a pep talk. Cool. And then it goes through. And, we've experimented around a few things like, of course, we might get a call in the past saying, oh, you know what, we had so many people just dropping the phone off over time. And then what we would work on is, well, how can we make sure people feel comfortable? Or we might even say, in order to get those points, actually, you have to be talking for at least 10, 15 seconds. So you can't just drop the phone. So there's a couple of things we've experimented with. But yeah, you're right. The verification is a critical part in order to get those points, and then in order to access those rewards.
Yeah, because I noticed as you reach internet scale, trolls come out and start to mess with things. So I'm glad to hear there's a manual verification process, because it's hard when it's such things like images, things like phone calls. It's hard to track. My next question is
I would just sound that I think that's where the importance of user journey comes in, right? Like, I'm sure if we went to, someone that had just signed up through One World Together at Home, they've come in because they love Lady Gaga and they watch and sign up to everything Lady Gaga's involved in because she's a phenomenal artist, and suddenly we're sending this person an email saying, hey, we want you to call your senator tomorrow. They might say, well, this is some pretty heavy stuff. So we have to think through, well, what's the bridge here? Maybe we send an email from, that comes from Lady Gaga. Maybe we give them some quizzes. And then over time, we might look at those who are most engaged and maybe send them some higher threshold actions so that you get the better quality actions being made, especially if it's, user-generated content. Maybe you're asking them to send a personalized email. But what I've seen is when we do that, we get some phenomenal responses. Like, we've had people create an artwork around the issues of global citizenship, designing and saying masks, writing the most heartfelt letters to politicians around why they care of issues. And when I see that, it reminds me, this is a movement, and it just makes me recognize that we have a responsibility to communicate, to be transparent, and to nurture that community and grow it.
Cool. I'd like to ask you about the concert, the virtual concert that you ran. You mentioned it a few times now, but I'm actually curious about the logistical issues of getting bands to agree and be technically prepared to do something online like that, which they're probably not used to. Not to mention, I'm not sure if this is what happened, but if band members were separate, you got latency issues. I just wanted to know, the biggest problems you ran into.
Was it pre-recorded or live?
Yeah,
I guess?
Stuff like that. Yeah, tell us more.
Yeah.
Without giving away the secret sauce, obviously.
Well, Together at Home was interesting. So, of course, all of our artists, like everyone else, human beings, following rules, trying to be responsible. They were all in lockdown, and they were all saying, we want to do something to engage our fans. We want to disseminate messages, but why social distancing is important. We want to make sure we're being responsible, communicating the right messaging, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. And then then we want to point people, if they want to take action or get involved, we want to send them to somewhere like Global Citizen so that they can help. And so Chris Martin was actually the first person to come up with it. And Chris has worked with us for the last 5 years, ever since Coldplay first performed at the Global Citizen Festival in 2015. He said, what I'm going to do? I'm just going to put on my Instagram, play a few songs, talk about why this is important, and encourage people to download the app if they want to take action. And he coined it Together at Home. And at the end of that, he gave the baton to John Legend, who took it and ran with it. And then he gave it to Shawn Mendes and Camila Cabello.
Wow.
And then that steamrolled until Lady Gaga saw it all. And she said, I want to do this with you guys, but I want to bring all the artists together for one day. And for that, it would have been great to have everyone live stream from their Instagram and do it all live. But as all of these networks came on board, everyone from the BBC, I think in Australia, we had like Channel 10, Channel 7 pick it all up, which was a first for us in Australia, let alone having two networks. Then across America, the three major networks, often in competition, picking it up. So it was like, okay, nothing can go wrong here. We need to piece it together. And so we simply asked, artists, we had a few weeks to pull this all together, to send in messages. And then we had a few days to piece it all together. Everyone worked remotely, but there were some surprises. The Rolling Stones came in the day before. No one wanted to miss out. It was like Live Aid. Some of the bands involved in Live Aid talk about not realizing how big and iconic it was going to be and not wanting to miss out. And Paul McCartney, actually, for me, I thought many years about it would be amazing just to have him, involved. And we've never been able to have him involved before. And he said, I'll do a message. And when he did the message, he then went over and played a song on his piano. No one was expecting that. That just completely happened, unfiltered content. But it was great. And for me, it was a crazy time because we had this first phone call with Lady Gaga, and then I literally got coronavirus the day after. And so it was like the space of 3 weeks of us having that first phone call, me having coronavirus, our team madly pulling this together, and then, finally the thing being aired. It was a crazy time, but it was, looking back, it was certainly, I think, for everyone involved, probably the most amazing thing they've ever done. And, I don't think I'm sharing too much when I say this, but the day after we did that, we had all of our production team, everyone zooming in from around the world, and Lady Gaga joined, and she actually, amidst tears, said it's the proudest thing she's ever been part of, even more so than when she won on, last year when she won the awards for Shallow and all of the amazing songs she did there. But that to me was amazing, and she put her heart and soul into it, and to get all the artists involved too. So it was crazy, crazy times.
I want to actually tap into your experience for a bit. We're building a platform essentially to enable drivers to band together and create their own cooperative rideshare service. So we've built the tech platform and created the kind of like a franchise, but limited for cooperatives. So because the biggest problem for these guys to actually empower themselves that way is the tech barrier is massive. So we've solved that problem, but now we're at that problem where we need to build a community to essentially raise awareness and funds and move it to the next level. It's obviously not an investable platform. It's not something you get venture capital for. Building a digital community, activist community, is not our strong point, not something we've ever had to do before. So what would be some tips you can give us, lowest hanging fruit, best way to engage the people who care about this problem? Where do you think we should start?
Yeah, gee, it's a good question. I would say, start to build together that community now. Even if it's putting names in an Excel spreadsheet, that stakeholder engagement is critical. And next to that, I would say, think about the messages, the spirit of that community. Write it down. Message and discipline is key to fostering a community, because otherwise it's just a group of people randomly coming together to discuss some ideas. And write those principles down and saying, are we achieving the objective? Is everything we're doing laddering up to these principles? Is everything we say also those principles actually help you simplify. There's so much clutter in the world that simplification is the best way to get cut through. It's what we found. Again, we're not always perfect at it. I would just say, if once you're communicating with your stakeholders and putting out messages, look back on what those principles are and say, have what I written, does this principle come through? Chances are, if the answer is no, either scrap it or cut it down or rewrite it. So simplification, getting down that stakeholder is key, starting from there. And then, of course, I would just say, especially in the early days, people are so busy. Don't make it hard for them to support you. I think, even if it's I'm thinking what we're doing next week as we're ramping up for this voter campaign, don't just send them an email saying, hey, can you share this on social media? Write the tweet for them. Write the tweet, put in the handles, put in the hashtags, send them it, put it so they can literally copy and paste and plug in. Social toolkits and regular communication is one of the best things to get people to work with you, to build that community and have a multiplier effect. And I would just say, don't be afraid. If you've got some friends in your networks who, maybe more influencers, or even if they've got a couple of thousand followers, it all helps. Don't be afraid to ask them to support. Sometimes it's funny, but we might be dealing with a campaign and you've sent someone an email, haven't assumed they've read it, but I might message them a few times. Sometimes I will even, again, making it easy for people. Through some of our campaigns this year, like One World Together at Home, I just got a simple tweet. We were trying to drive tune in, and I just sent it out to everyone on my WhatsApp and said, hey, please consider sharing this or retweeting it. And a number of people, some of these people I hadn't heard from in years. Yeah. And I just thought, what the heck? The worst they can do is block me. And they just said, done. So I would just say, don't be afraid to reach out, ask people. And again, not just email, but on multiple chains. And WhatsApp is great for that. WhatsApp is great for building a community. In fact, my final recommendation, have a WhatsApp group of some of your influencers. Make that your primary method of communication and updates, where you can quickly send it and say, hey, will you quickly post this? Will you quickly do that? And feed in regular updates. People won't necessarily respond all the time, but just when they happen to be on there and they see it, they respond.
That's fantastic. Yeah, thank you for that.
And of course, WhatsApp will help you make it global as well. It's one of the best things is, I've got groups of people all in different parts of Africa and around the world. It makes it so easy.
You've also inspired me with engaging celebrities, especially music artists and actors and things like that. We know we've already got a list of these who have been Uber drivers, so they're a great target. Advice on how to approach them. Yeah, what's the protocol? Again, not something I've ever done, not even Australian celebrities, let alone global celebrities.
Yeah, so there's the traditional protocol, and that is, you go try and find their publicist online. Generally the publicist, if you're looking for them to promote something or get behind a cause, the publicist is the person many people would direct you to, that they would vet you. Now, I would say this is very hard. It's very hard cold calling, and it's very hard without a referral from someone. But if you are going to go this avenue, work on your narrative. Work on the narrative and pitch, make it as simple as possible, and try and really, maybe they've got a particular resonance, with the issue. This is a funny story. I was telling about the concert, the end of Polio concert, when we got John Legend to perform. One of my friends who was the producer on that, she managed to track down the email for the lead singer of The Cure. The band The Cure.
Yeah, Robert Smith. Yeah.
This is an example of a narrative that didn't work. I remember she wrote this long email about but you're the cure. You could be the cure to end polio. Didn't resonate. Didn't garner a response. But I've seen it where if you think about the narrative, what's going to excite them, and by the way, often it doesn't even have to be something that they've expressed interest in. The key to a strong narrative, I think, is showing them why their voice will make a difference, because they get hit up all the time, and they want to, figure out how they can make a difference. But at the same time, are we just raising awareness, or are we actually contributing to the problem? I think in concrete terms, if you can show them how their involvement would make an impact. And then secondly, they often like taking their fans along with them. They don't just want to ask their fans for money, but they take those fans along as part of their community. So have a think about how you might be able to involve them.
Fantastic. That's great advice. It's always feels like the internet gives you access to billions of people, but one of billions of people trying to yell to billions of people. So you've done an amazing job cutting through that. Much respect. Yeah.
Well, thanks. Always happy to, if there's a specific message you're trying to get across, happy to brainstorm.
Fantastic. All right, well, let's jump to the last question. So we always end our podcasts with a bit of a whimsical question. So the question we always ask our guests is, what would your intro music be? So, in the context of like wrestling, MMA, the fighters always have their intro music. So you walk into a room, the lights go dim, everyone looks at you. What music is playing?
This is a gotcha question.
Yes, it is. So one of the guests turned it back on me and said, "Well, what's yours?" And I'm like, "Oh God, I don't know. David Bowie Heroes," but it was totally just the only song that came to mind.
Let me think. I would have to say it's not very much a macho wrestling song, so it's probably not gonna make anyone in the ring afraid. But I would probably have to say Beyonce and Jay-Z's version of Forever Young.
Brilliant. All right. Well, excellent. Yeah, that's a great answer. Yeah, really good. Cool.
Really appreciate it.
And it was really great hearing your experiences, which are pretty unique.
Yeah. Well, appreciate it. Thanks for reaching out. Always happy to chat. Who knows? I hope someday I'll be allowed back in Perth. When this winds down. Once we're allowed to travel again. Yeah. Until then, stay in touch.
Definitely. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Michael.
Cool. Thanks, Michael.
Appreciate it, guys. All the best. See you soon.
Thanks so much, Michael. Welcome to the end of another episode of Tech Society.
On this day in tech, September 16th, 1985, Steve Jobs resigns from Apple. He goes on to found Next and purchase Pixar before eventually returning to Apple. On this exact day, 12 years later, September 16, 1997.
As always, this episode was sponsored by Ninja Software. We think big and we move quietly. Check us out, njs.dev. Thank you for listening, everyone. I'm Alex.
I'm John.
See you later.
Bye.